They said I was senile, locked me away in a care home, stole my photographs, my life, and turned me invisible in my own family. But they forgot I once stood in war zones. I don't fall to a woman with a fake smile. That gala night I didn't show up with just a camera, I came with evidence, and my silence finally detonated. If you think this is just another family drama, you're wrong. Subscribe now to catch more haunting cinematic betrayal stories we'll bring to light. My son's front door was never locked until the night I walked in and wasn't supposed to. The tapping of my cane echoed softly off the polished floorboards, steady but stubborn like a war drum played slow. Each step marked a rhythm of aging, a stubborn beat, against the silence that had quietly wrapped itself around this house. Brian's house. Well, no. Our house, really. A house he could only afford because 20 years ago I'd sold off a lifetime of war photos, black and white ghosts, from Bosnia, Rwanda, Beirut, to fund a down payment he didn't know how to ask for. I gave it willingly. Back then he still called me every Sunday. Back then he still remembered I was his mother. Now the only thing that seemed to remember me was the hardwood floor beneath my feet, and it winced with every tap of my cane. I stood just inside the foyer, wet boots on the mat, coat still on. I didn't rush to take it off. No one rushed to greet me. It had been a month since the stroke. Minor, they'd said. Just a warning. One arm weaker than the other. A few words that still stumbled on my tongue if I wasn't careful. But I was careful. All the time now. Brian had suggested I move in, and I had accepted more out of instinct than need. That was how things were supposed to go, wasn't it? The mother raised the child, and in the twilight years the child returned the favor. I didn't need luxury or space or even peace. I just needed to not be forgotten. Instead, I was relocated. The walls were white, always white, the kind of sterile elegance that sold well in magazines. Lana had picked the decor, obviously. She always did. Everything in this house had a label: minimalist, modern, Scandinavian, cold. I could hear her in the kitchen before I saw her. Lana never raised her voice, but you could always hear her. She had that particular tone that clipped through walls like a scalpel through gauze, calm, sharp, final. I told you to rotate the medication case before tomorrow morning, she said to someone, probably the home nurse. She gets confused when they're not in the right order. I wasn't confused. I'd never been confused. Just slower now, just quieter. Brian appeared around the corner, his smile too quick, too polished. Hey, Mom, you're up early. I heard the blender, I said. He rubbed the back of his neck. Yeah, Lana's doing one of her juice things again. Lana's juice things. She drank blended spinach and protein powder and called it dinner. I remembered when Brian used to eat meatloaf off a paper plate while sitting cross-legged on the floor. He used to thank me for my cooking. Now he fasted on Thursdays and ate organic fish in silence. She said I got confused yesterday, I said, leaning on my cane, because I asked for toast. Brian gave a tight laugh, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. She just worries. You've been through a lot. I'm not broken, Brian. He opened his mouth but said nothing. It was always like this now, conversations clipped short, concern reshaped into correction. The line between care and control blurred more each day. Lana entered, her blonde hair tied back in a silk scarf, not a strand out of place. She was the kind of woman who turned heads when she walked into a room, precise, poised, perpetually prepared to be photographed, even if no one was holding a camera. Evelyn, she said, smiling like she was greeting a neighbor she didn't like. Did you remember to check your pill organizer this morning? I was just about to. I already did it for you, she replied, breezing past to drop a lemon wedge into her glass of water. No need to worry. That was the thing about Lana. She was always 5 steps ahead of your own autonomy. If I breathed, she checked my lungs. If I blinked, she moisturized my eyes. I said nothing, just nodded like a guest who didn't want to overstay her welcome. But I wasn't a guest. I was someone who used to be known. The days blurred together after that. Lana had me on a scheduled meals, rest, hydration exercise. My camera sat untouched on the desk in my room like an artifact from another life. I used to document revolutions. Now I waited for someone to tell me when to eat yogurt. Brian was never home. Not really. His job demanded long hours. His phone buzzed constantly, and when he was around, he spent most of it quietly scrolling. When we did talk, it was about shallow things, whether television supplements. Never about what I needed most: connection, memory, the ache of relevance. One evening after dinner, I stood by the hallway bookshelf. My books had made it to the house at least. Old National Geographic yearbooks, memoirs of war correspondents, and faded photo albums of war-torn children and broken skies. Lana walked by. "These are intense," she said, touching the cracked spine of a 1983 issue. "They're real, of course." She nodded, eyes cold. "But I don't think Elliot needs to see that kind of thing just yet." Elliot, my grandson, 11 going on 40. He asked real questions about life, war, death, fear. He reminded me of Brian once, before the neckties, before the apologetic silences. That night after they'd gone to sleep, I couldn't rest. Something churned in me, a restlessness that had no name, only rhythm. I left my room and wandered down the hall, cane in one hand, the other grazing the cool plaster of the wall. A door stood ajar to my left. I'd never noticed it before. It wasn't locked. A soft breeze from the window made it creak open just an inch more, like an invitation. At that moment, something irrational came over me. Not suspicion, not curiosity, not even rebellion, just a nudge, the same kind I'd followed through war zones and refugee camps. That voice inside that said, "Look, just look." I stepped inside. No overhead lights, just the soft glow of a desk lamp and the low hum of a small fan on the floor. The walls were lined with file cabinets, color-coded folders, labeled envelopes, each drawer organized alphabetically. This wasn't a guest room. It wasn't a storage room. It was an operation. Lana's name was everywhere. Her Qui Tu Thine, the Bridge Project. I knew about it, of course. It was part of the reason she made those phone calls on speakerphone, always polite, always professional. She'd claimed it was focused on resettling displaced children from global conflict zones. Noble work, she said. Necessary. Brian had shown me the website once. All blue tones and hopeful quotes. "We give forgotten children a future." But the photos, I knew those photos. Not like a stranger recognizes a famous image. No, I knew them like a mother knows a birthmark. Like a soldier knows the exact moment a bullet missed. They were mine. I'd taken them. 2006. Kandahar. An abandoned orphanage outside the southern gate. A boy with a scabbed lip and hollow eyes. A girl missing half an arm, still smiling. I remembered their names. I remembered the smell of blood and sunburn and the sound of flies near the window. But Lana had edited them, cropped, saturated, filtered them into something polished, fake. And beneath each photo, dollar amounts, donation metrics, targets met. Something caught in my throat. I reached for one of the open folders, receipts, spreadsheets, wire transfers to accounts not listed on the organization's website. My hands began to tremble, not from age but from memory, rage. This was fraud. This was theft of trust, of faces, of stories, of my work, my legacy. And Lana, she was selling it like soap. I stumbled back, cane nearly slipping from my grasp. The quiet suddenly felt like pressure, like the walls were leaning in. Then I heard it, a tiny click, barely audible. Above the doorway, camera light. Red recording. I turned slowly, walked out, closed the door, did not lock it. I didn't know then what Lana would do with that footage. Didn't know how far she'd go. Didn't yet know that the price of opening that door was nearly losing everything. But I did know one thing as I stood in the hallway that night, hand-shaking, heart-pounding ghosts stirring behind my ribs. Some doors aren't meant to be locked, especially when the truth lives behind them. Sometimes the worst betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes dressed in your own memory, edited, cropped, and sold for profit. The room was too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the sterile, humming silence of a place that didn't want to be discovered. I stood frozen for a moment just inside the doorway, the soft light of the desk lamp casting a pool across the floor. My cane made no sound now I'd lifted it instinctively, like some part of me already understood that I wasn't supposed to be here, that this moment wasn't supposed to happen, but it had. I closed the door slowly behind me. not shutting it all the way, just enough to feel like I had some illusion of privacy. The hallway light bled in faintly through the gap. I wasn't here to stay, I was here to see. The desk was immaculate. A glass surface, no fingerprints. Silver pen holders, notepads stacked with surgical precision. But my eyes were drawn elsewhere, to the wide bulletin board on the wall behind it. It was a grid of tragedy made beautiful. Dozens of photos neatly arranged in a calculated chaos. At a glance, it looked like a collage of humanitarian work, smiling children, dusty villages, rows of tents, outstretched hands. But I knew better. I'd taken half of them. Kandahar, Mogadishu, Dadaab. Places that were etched into my bones. Places where I'd watched children starve and mothers dig graves for infants too light to make the soil shift. Photos I never released to the public. Photos Lana was never meant to have. I stepped closer, my breath catching as I scanned the images. Each one was different and yet not. The angles were familiar, the expressions, the sorrow, the setting sun behind tents. But the edits, God, the edits. She'd brightened the eyes. She'd blurred the wounds. She'd added warmth where there was none. Where there had once been desperation, she'd crafted hope. Where there had been pain, she'd painted inspiration. She'd taken war and turned it into marketing. My hands shook as I reached out to touch one of the photos. A girl I remembered vividly, Jamila, age 9, left deaf after a mortar strike. I had sat with her for hours, translating her silence through a local teacher, letting her hold the camera, letting her feel control again. The photo I took was raw, her eyes hollow, her hands clenched in her lap. The version on the board smiling, cropped just under the hands, overlaid with a semi-transparent quote in elegant serif font: "Hope grows in every child." No, I thought, not like this, not her. I turned away and saw the shelf along the back wall, rows of file boxes labeled by year and project. I didn't have time to sort through everything, but one drawer was slightly ajar, as if recently accessed. Inside were donor packets, brochures, pitch decks, and at the bottom, a binder thick with reports. Q3 Impact Summary, The Bridge Project. I opened it, flipping past pages of metrics, lives touched, meals delivered, children sponsored. And then I found them. Bank statements, wire transfers, names I didn't recognize, numbers that didn't match any charitable expense I'd ever seen. One page listed $47,500 in educational support wired directly to a Shell account in Belize. Another page showed expenses for cultural photography licensing, $18,000 to a creative agency I'd never heard of. I stared at the numbers, the elegant fonts, the fake polish. She was laundering stories, laundering pain, and people were buying it. That sick feeling you get when the floor drops from under you. It came then, not all at once, but in waves. One moment I was burning with rage, the next chilled with dread. Because this wasn't just deceit. This was theft of lives, of grief, of truth, my truth. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out my old cell phone, the one Lana had scoffed at for being vintage. I opened the camera. No flash. One by one, I started snapping photos, first the board, then the bank statements, then a wide shot of the desk. My hands shook, but I managed. I even zoomed in on one name circled in red ink, Matthew Crenshaw, listed under Media Liaison. Secure contact. Crenshaw, a name I hadn't heard in 20 years. We'd once been embedded together in South Sudan. He'd sold out, left journalism for PR. I hadn't thought of him since he'd ghosted an expose on human trafficking in 2005. Now he was working with her. I finished quickly checking my gallery to make sure the shots were saved. That's when I heard it. Click. Soft, mechanical, almost polite. I froze, looked up. There it was, just above the doorframe. Tiny, sleek. A motion-sensitive camera. Its tiny red light was no longer blinking. It was solid. Recording. My heart skipped a beat. How long had it been on? Did it catch me entering my face? Probably. My blood ran cold, but I didn't panic. I didn't move. I stared at the lens for a moment, letting it see me fully. If she was going to watch me later, I wanted her to see my face, not afraid, not broken, just disappointed. Then I turned, slipped my phone back into my coat pocket, and walked out. The way I came, quietly cane lifted to silence door left exactly as I found it. I returned to my room and sat down in the dark. I didn't turn on the lamp, didn't pull the blankets, just sat there staring at nothing. What now? Do I confront her? Do I tell Brian? Would they believe me? Or would Lana spin at first claim I was wandering, confused, delusional? She was good at that, weaponizing concern into control. I had watched her do it with such grace that even I had started questioning myself. But now I had proof. I reached into my coat and pulled the phone out again, backed up the photos to the cloud, then emailed them to myself. Twice. Once to my main account, once to the old backup address I hadn't touched in years. That done, I breathed out, still slow, still careful. Across the hall I heard Lana's footsteps. She was awake. I laid the phone on my nightstand and waited. I didn't have to wait long. 2 minutes later the knock came gentle, rehearsed. "Evelyn," she called. "Are you awake?" I didn't answer. The door creaked open. She stepped in barefoot robe, perfectly cinched, eyes wide with concern. "I heard movement, just wanted to check on you." "I'm fine," I said quietly. She stood there a second longer, her eyes scanning the room, calculating. Then she smiled that hollow smile. "Okay, just wanted to make sure. Good night." She closed the door gently behind her. But as it clicked shut, I could feel the air change. No longer gentle, calculated. She had seen the footage, and now she knew I knew. Down the hallway I heard her phone buzz once, then twice. A message sent. And in that moment, sitting alone in the dark, I realized something that chilled me deeper than any betrayal. This wasn't just a secret. This was a system, and I had just become its problem. It started the next morning. At first the changes were subtle, almost too subtle to question. My morning pill case was suddenly a different color, blue instead of green. Lana explained it as a new organizational system recommended by her friend who worked in geriatrics. I didn't argue. I just took the pills, though the shape of one was different. Smaller, lighter. By noon the tea tasted different, sweeter than usual. I asked if she'd added something. "Just honey," she said with a smile. "You always forget to sweeten it." But I didn't. I never took sugar or honey. Years in field hospitals had dulled my taste for sweetness. I'd lived on bitter coffee, burnt rice, and the tin taste of adrenaline. I knew what my tongue was telling me, and it wasn't honey. Later that day I went to check the camera roll on my phone, the one with all the pictures from her office. They were gone, every single one. Deleted. I blinked hard, stared again, flipped through folders. Nothing. Not even in the deleted folder. Just gone. I checked the cloud, no backups. That old sense of dread returned, like walking into a village after hearing too many dogs bark. You knew something was wrong, but the silence was too perfect. And suddenly I realized she hadn't just seen the footage. She was already working to erase it. That night my dreams came in flashes. Jamila's face twisted in the edit. Lana smiling with my camera. Brian whispering behind closed doors. I woke in a sweat. The next morning, Lana brought me breakfast in bed. She never did that. Toast, oatmeal, and a perfectly cut orange slice. "I thought I'd spoil you today," she said brightly. I stared at the plate. Something about it felt performative, like she wanted me to see how much she was caring. "You didn't have to do this," I said cautiously. "Oh, nonsense," she replied. "Besides, Brian says he's worried you've been a little withdrawn lately. Said you mentioned something about doctored photos." My heart sank. So that's how it started. Innocent concern. Maybe I said. Maybe I got confused. She smiled satisfied. 2 hours later, I overheard her on the phone, probably with Brian. "No, nothing big. Just small things. She's mixing up words. She asked for toast twice this morning, said she already ate. I really think she should get checked." I had only asked once. By the end of the week, the narrative had shifted. Brian came home early one afternoon, visibly strained. "Mom, can we talk?" We sat in the living room, Lana perched nearby like a hawk watching 2 mice pretend to be cordial. He cleared his throat. "Lana's been worried, and honestly, so have I." I stayed silent. "She says you've been misplacing things. You told her I was on a work trip last Tuesday, but I wasn't. I was home. We had dinner." I blinked. "No, you were at a conference." He looked at Lana, and her face was pure patience. "See," she said gently. Brian turned back to me. "Mom, are you okay?" "No," I said, staring at them both. "I'm not okay. because there's something going on in this house and I don't think I'm the only one who knows it. You mean the photos Lana cut in, from my office? I looked at her, surprised she'd acknowledge it so directly. I saw the folder you left open, I said carefully. Those photos aren't yours. They're mine, and they've been edited, altered for your donors. Lana folded her hands delicately in her lap. Evelyn, do you remember when you showed me those photos 2 years ago? You said I could use them for awareness campaigns. I never said, it's okay, I'm not blaming you, but perhaps you're remembering it differently. Brian's face was full of concern now, not anger, not disbelief, just that soft, patronizing worry people use when they talk to toddlers. She's been through so much, Lana continued. The stroke, the transition, the pressure of losing independence. These kinds of misunderstandings are common. I stood slowly. I'm not misunderstanding anything. You're stealing stories. You're monetizing suffering. Mom, Brian said, rising with me, this doesn't have to become something big. Maybe we should bring in someone. A memory specialist, just to be sure. And there it was, the soft edge of the blade. A memory specialist. By Sunday, a family meeting was scheduled. They didn't call it an intervention, but it was. Brian sat across from me with a legal pad. Lana served tea to the social worker she'd invited over, Dr. Janet Holloway, soft-spoken and warm-eyed, her kind of weapon. They smiled at me like I was a frightened animal. We just want to talk, Lana said gently. Dr. Holloway explained that cognitive drift after a stroke is common, that sometimes the world shifts and memory lags behind it. But I remember everything I said. I remember taking those photos. I remember the names of those children. I remember where you were born, Brian. Do you remember? He smiled sadly. Mom, you were early. 2 weeks. You tore me from the inside. I named you after your grandfather. No response. Lana glanced at the doctor. Dr. Holloway leaned forward. Evelyn, sometimes we hold on too tight to certain things. Memory isn't always about truth. It's about comfort. I stared at her hollow. That's the most dangerous sentence I've ever heard. At the end of the meeting, I was offered what they called a restorative space, a luxury memory care facility 30 minutes out of town. They have on-site specialists, Lana said brightly. Daily art therapy, photography classes, even yoga, Brian added. It's just for a few weeks, until we get clarity. I laughed once, sharp and humorless. I've been in prisons softer than this house, I said. But at least there the guards admitted who they were. No one laughed with me. The next morning, Lana packed my bags for me. I wasn't given much say. Brian drove me there in silence. When we arrived, I stared up at the building, whitewashed walls, glass doors that didn't lock from the inside, and staff that smiled too long, everything too clean, too polished. They had a room ready, already furnished, like they'd planned it all along. Brian kissed my forehead. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered. I didn't answer. I just turned and walked in head-high, cane firm against the tile floor. And as the doors slid closed behind me, I thought to myself, I've been locked in war zones. I've seen men disappear for telling the truth. But nothing prepares you for being caged by your own blood. They called it a facility, a restorative space, a wellness community. What it really was a white room with no doorknobs on the inside. The irony wasn't lost on me. After decades photographing the ruins of war zones, makeshift refugee camps, and makeshift prisons disguised as hospitals, here I was institutionalized by my own family under the soft glow of compassionate care. The place was clean, sterile, almost religious in its obsession with order. Every wall the color of polished bone, every chair molded plastic built to survive 1,000 wipe-downs. The lighting always cool, never warm, like a waiting room for a god who never showed up. They gave me a badge, a bracelet, a clipboard evaluation of my orientation. And then they took my phone. We'll keep this at the nurse's station, said a woman named Molly, her voice sweet as syrup, her grip firm as a handcuff. You just focus on healing Evelyn. I said nothing. They didn't need my permission. I was now a resident. At first I thought I could wait it out, play along, observe, but then came the pills. Twice a day, always with water, and always while they watched. The first time I tried to fake it, slipped the tablet under my tongue and spit it later. But Molly had nurse eyes. She knew. I saw it in the way her smile didn't shift, but her pupils narrowed. The second day they watched me swallow. The third day, they crushed the pills into pudding. By the end of the week, I was floating. Not asleep, not awake, somewhere in between. I could hear things, the chatter of bingo in the West Lounge, the creak of carts in the hallway, someone crying in the next room over, but they all sounded like they were coming from inside a snow globe, muffled, muted, unreal. I tried to write. My hand shook. I tried to speak clearly. My tongue dragged. I tried to remember why I was there, and for one horrifying moment I couldn't. That was the worst part. Not the room, not the staff, not the rules, but the terror that maybe Lana was right. Maybe I was fading, until a whisper snapped me out of it. Grandma. I blinked. The light outside had changed. It was late afternoon, golden and dim. I turned my head slowly, and there he was, Elliot, standing at the foot of my bed like a secret the world forgot to hide. He looked older, or maybe it was just the way he stood back, straight face set, eyes wide but determined. He was wearing his backpack and a hoodie zipped all the way to the top. His sneakers were muddy. He had come alone. Elliot. My voice barely made it out. The drug made my throat slow. He crept closer. I lied to the security guy, told him my dad was picking me up and I left my chess set in here. I followed behind a group and slipped in the side exit. I almost laughed. I wanted to hug him. I wanted to scream for joy. Instead, I motioned with a trembling finger toward the chair. He sat, knees bouncing nervously. I knew something was wrong, he whispered. Dad keeps saying you're sick, but he looks scared when he says it. And Lana won't even say your name. She just says stuff like the situation or the adjustment. He looked at me now, truly looked. Are you okay? I shook my head. His fists clenched. I knew it. I closed my eyes. I had to move carefully, slowly. My voice was gravel, but it still belonged to me. I need your help. He leaned forward. Anything. In the basement, I said. The old bookshelf, bottom row, behind the box of Christmas lights. There's a plastic crate. He nodded slowly. It's taped shut. White tape. Red label. It says, I paused, dragging the memory through the fog. Kandahar 2006. He mouthed the words silently, committing them to memory. In it are discs. Old ones. Photos. Originals. From my camera. From before. From everything. Before I couldn't finish. My mouth was dry, my pulse loud in my ears. Got it, he said. I'll find it. No one can know. Not your dad, especially not her. He swallowed hard. Are they going to keep you here forever? I looked away. I don't know, I said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded square of paper. I wrote you a code for when we talk. I figured maybe I could visit more. Pretend it's for school or chess or something. He unfolded the paper and showed me a system of 3 small drawings, sun, moon, and star, each paired with a time and phrase. Sun meant ask about the discs. Moon meant they searched your room. Star meant I got them. I stared at him, my heart swelling. He had always been a sharp child, but this was beyond clever. It was brave. You're a soldier, I whispered. He grinned proud. I gotta go soon. They'll notice, but I'll come back, and I'll find the box. He stood. I believe you, Grandma, he said, even if they don't. I watched him slip out as silently as he had entered the door, clicking behind him like a promise. And for the first time in days, I felt the drug loosen its grip. Not because it had worn off, but because hope was louder than chemistry. I sat up straighter. I reached for the pen on the bedside clipboard and began to write again. My hands still trembled, but the words came. Not full sentences, not yet, but notes, coordinates of memory. She edited Jamila's scar. Crenshaw media contact verified. Don't let Lana see the discs. Brian is afraid. That night I slept light, and I dreamed for the first time not of war, but of a child on a bike racing through suburban streets with the truth in his backpack. The first signal came on a Thursday. It was the shape of a sun, drawn in pencil, on the corner of a library book Elliot had checked out for me, a history of modern war photography. He handed it to me through the recreational window, his fingers tight, his face unreadable. Sun, that was the code we'd agreed on. It meant I found it. I held the book like scripture. Inside, on page 57, where a photo of Sarajevo smoldered in black and white, was a small post-it note stuck just behind the page. The note read, there were 3 discs, 2 labeled. 1 wasn't. I've hidden all of them. Also, I read 1. You're right. She's lying. I had to sit down. My breath came slow, measured. I wasn't alone. Not anymore. And more than that, I was believed. The next step was mine. I needed evidence, not just against Lana, but against the machine she'd constructed around me. The one dressed as care, decorated with smiling nurses and pastel walls and calendar reminders for Tai Chi. One evening during my routine sundown observation therapy, a pointless check-in meant to determine if my cognition declined with sunset, I caught 2 of the aides chatting just outside the room. I mean, you know this one's not even really diagnosed, right? One said, laughing under her breath. Her daughter-in-law just pushed it through. Private funding does wonders. Still, we're not supposed to say that. They both snorted and their cart wheeled off. That was enough. The next morning, when Molly came in to check my vitals, I asked her to help me reprogram the radio clock on my nightstand. I told her the beeping made me anxious, that I needed silence. She rolled her eyes and fiddled with it for a few minutes before switching off the alarm completely. Then she left. What she didn't notice was that the back cover of the radio was loose. I'd been working it loose for days, and what she really didn't notice was that I'd replaced the useless broken speaker inside it. With a pocket voice recorder Elliot had slipped me 2 visits ago, disguised inside a hollow chess piece. I pressed record. That afternoon I invited 2 staff members into my room for what I told them was a confession. I said I had a moment of clarity, that I remembered deleting emails and leaving doors open. I needed to confess it before I forgot again. They nodded sympathetically. Then one of them said, as casually as you'd mention the weather, "Well, Evelyn, that's very brave of you. Lana said your type usually goes through this phase before surrendering completely." Click. I smiled, shook their hands, and watched them leave. That night I transferred the file to a flash drive Elliot had left in my laundry bag, taped to the tag of a pair of socks, wrapped in foil. We were getting better at this. Our second signal system involved light. I'd asked for a reading lamp for my room, something dim so I could feel like I was home. They obliged. It was a small desk lamp with a push button. I used it every night. Elliot, in his brilliance, brought a twin lamp and set it up in his bedroom. We agreed on 3 light patterns. 1 flash every 10 seconds, all is safe. 2 quick flashes. They searched the room. A long pulse followed by 2 short blinks. Deliver next move. We tested it through the glass of the garden window that faced the visitor's wing. At precisely 8:00 p.m. each evening, Elliot would walk the dog past the side fence and pause under the maple tree. From there, he'd see the pulse from my lamp. And from his backpack, he'd click a remote that made his lamp flash in reply, powered by a simple battery pack and a hidden button inside the leash handle. 2 people, 2 lights, a war fought silently. Then came the writing. Not memories, not letters, not just documentation, but a chronicle, a manifesto, a legal breadcrumb trail. Because if Lana succeeded in burying me, I needed Elliot to have something she couldn't edit. I used the clipboard they gave me. Every day for an hour, I was allowed journaling therapy. They believed it helped me cope, and it did. Just not in the way they imagined. I documented everything, the exact pill count and times I took them. What staff said and when, what Lana texted Brian, the shifts in tone from one nurse to the next, details about the financial accounts I remembered from her office, the fake invoices, the donation metrics, the children's names, the coordinates I'd stored in my old war notebooks that matched the photos she'd stolen. And at the bottom of each page I signed it. Not just Evelyn Monroe, war photographer, witness. I folded each sheet into an envelope, marked the date, and hid it in the spine of War and Peace, one of the 5 books Lana had left in my room as decoration. She probably didn't expect me to actually read it. I did. The book became a vault. By the 3rd week, I had a full record of my time inside the White Room, every violation, every distortion of truth, every gaslighting smile. One day, Elliot slipped me a Polaroid photo. It was grainy, but I knew what it was. It was a shot of the 3 discs, 2 labeled, 1 plain, laid out on his desk. The labels read, Kandahar, 2006, Raw. Duffy Project, Campsites North. No label. On the back of the photo he'd written in tiny letters, "The blank one has an audio file. Sounds like a meeting. Lana's voice, talking about presentation impact edits, and someone named Crenshaw. Crenshaw, that name again. Her media liaison. The same man who ghosted a trafficking story I tried to publish 20 years ago. Now apparently helping Lana whitewash genocide into glossy pitch decks. I stared at the Polaroid for a long time. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of it, the children, the donors, the manipulation. This wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was systemic theft hiding behind the mask of doing good. By the 4th week, I was ready. I had my journal, I had my recordings, I had Elliot. All we needed was timing, and we both knew what was coming. Lana's Gala, the annual showcase of impact, the one she used to attract sponsors, partners, high-profile donors, and government endorsements. A house of cards built on doctored smiles. We just had to knock. But first, we had to get me out. Rain. It hadn't rained in weeks. But the night before the gala, it came fast and uninvited like a judgment. Fitting. I had spent the last 6 days watching Lana's name pop up on every staff monitor newsletter and hallway poster. Celebrating 10 years of global hope, the Bridge Project annual gala. She was calling it a decade of light. I called it what it was, a monument to theft. Banners with her face hung from buildings across town. Her voice played in promo videos running on loop in the activity center. This isn't about me, she'd recorded, smile sweet and eyes hollow. It's about the lives we've touched. She wasn't wrong. She'd touched lives. She'd touched them, repackaged them, and sold their stories like scented candles. And tomorrow night she would stand before politicians, celebrities, donors, and media giants, offering a glossy slideshow of manipulated images and metrics, unless I stopped her. So I gave them what they wanted: weakness. That morning during my scheduled occupational therapy session, I let my legs buckle beside the stair rail. I didn't fall far, just enough to twist, just enough to cry out. 2 aides rushed in. I clutched my hip and gasped like I was drowning in pain. Molly, the head nurse, hovered over me, panic behind her composure. I think I tore something, I whispered, eyes wide and glassy. She frowned. You're not due for imaging until next week. Then don't move me, I said, breathless. Just rest, just rest. For the rest of the day, I stayed in bed. I refused food. I moaned during routine checks. I let the drugs roll over me without resistance. And slowly their surveillance loosened. That night, Elliot arrived for his scheduled homework visit. Lana approved the visit through her assistant, some PR-friendly stunt to show the facility allowed family connection. She had no idea what she was authorizing. He entered with his backpack slung low, wearing his dad's raincoat and a knitted cap that covered his face halfway. Beneath the chessboard and snack bags was everything we needed. He walked in, placed the board on my bed, and smiled at the nurse. She won't talk much tonight, he said. She's in pain. I'll just keep her company. The nurse barely nodded. She trusted Elliot. Everyone did. He was just a kid, after all. Exactly why he was perfect. As soon as the door closed, he reached into the backpack and handed me gloves. Ready, he whispered. I nodded. Under the bed was a change of clothes, my old jeans, a hoodie that said University of Chicago Journalism Dept, and a pair of rubber-soled sneakers we'd taken weeks to smuggle in piece by piece. It took 10 minutes to change, 5 more to pull the loose screws from the bathroom vent cover. Elliot slipped inside, first agile like a ferret. I followed, slow but steady, gripping the flashlight between my teeth. We crawled through the service duct. It was tight, metallic, and smelled of dust and old soap. But at least it was real, honest filth, not the artificial fresh linen scent of the rooms above. When we reached the exit panel behind the kitchen freezer, Elliot pushed it open. We slid into the storage hallway, silent and invisible. We moved past carts of frozen peas and labeled syringes. I knew the camera rotations by heart. I'd studied them from my window every night. At exactly 7:55 p.m., the North Corridor blinked out for its 6-minute reboot. We hit that window. Elliot guided me down the back stairwell. Outside, the rain hit us like bullets, soaking us instantly. He looked up at me, worried. You sure? I smiled for the first time in days. I've walked through Baghdad with less cover than this. We crossed 2 fences, one with rusted chains we'd loosened during a previous visit. Then onto the trail that led into the residential block. His bike was hidden under a blue tarp behind the gardening shed. 2 helmets, 2 flashlights mounted to the handlebar. I climbed on behind him. and off we rode through the night in the rain, my arms wrapped around my grandson, my cane lashed to the side like a rifle. 20 minutes later, we stopped in front of a modest brownstone in the old part of town. 3 stories, yellow light bleeding from a second-floor window. "This is the place," Elliot said. I hadn't been here in years. The name on the mailbox was still the same, K. Shaw. Kendra Shaw, once my student, then my assistant in the Balkans. Now a seasoned investigative reporter with her own newsroom, her own scars, and most importantly, her own reach. I knocked 3 times. She opened the door wearing sweatpants and a faded Amnesty International t-shirt, a mug of tea in one hand. She stared at me stunned. "Holy shit," she said softly. "Evelyn." I looked at her, soaked and shaking but standing tall. "Got a story for you," I said. She ushered us in. Elliot peeled off his coat and ran to the bathroom. I stood in her hallway, dripping on her welcome mat, and handed her the backpack. 3 discs, a printed folder, my handwritten journals, a flash drive with the voice recordings. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through it. "What am I looking at?" she asked, her voice tightening. "You remember Crenshaw?" I asked. "Of course, he buried the Ethiopia piece." "Well, he's working with Lana now. She's doctoring humanitarian images mine, faking impact reports, laundering donor funds. She's showcasing it all tomorrow at a 10-year gala. She'll be standing in front of half the state and a dozen media networks." Kendra blinked, and the kicker, I added. She tried to erase me, institutionalized me, and my own son signed the papers. Her jaw clenched. She looked at me for a long, quiet moment, then turned and locked the front door behind her. "You're staying here tonight," she said. "I can't. If I disappear, they'll activate a report. Elliot's already pushing his luck." I said. She interrupted. "You're staying. And tomorrow we publish. You're not the story. You're the source." I almost cried, but I didn't, not yet. She gave Elliot the couch, gave me the guest room, laid out dry clothes, hot tea. And then at 3:10 a.m., I watched through the window as she connected her laptop to an encrypted server and began uploading every file. She called in her editor, called in 3 other journalists. She had friends in the city press, regional TV, and 2 data analysts from a nonprofit. By 4:15 a.m., they had cross-referenced my images, invoices, and Lana's public filings. The math didn't lie. Lana's charity was siphoning money to 3 unrelated consultants. Crenshaw was one. The other 2 were shell LLCs traced to overseas accounts. The photos mine had been used in 12 campaigns without attribution, 3 of them to secure public grants totaling over $900,000. It was a house of glass. And tomorrow we would throw stones. Kendra looked at me across the table. "You know she'll deny all of this." "I expect her to. She might sue." "Let her. She might go after Elliot." That made me pause. "I won't let her," I said quietly. Kendra nodded. "Then we go to war." We sealed the envelope for the media drop. Kendra scheduled her article to go live at 8:45 p.m., 30 minutes into the gala, right after Lana's keynote was scheduled to begin. I looked at Elliot. He was asleep on the floor, curled under a blanket, his hand still clutching the toy flashlight. "You did good, soldier," I whispered. I turned off the lamp, and for the first time in years I slept without fear. They say truth has a sound. That night it had the sound of silk heels across polished marble, clinking glasses, quiet violin strings, and the low murmur of self-congratulation echoing under chandeliers. It was Lana's moment. The gala hall was cavernous, all chrome and candlelight, a high-ceilinged temple of affluence. Gold trim glistened on every table. Servers glided like ghosts, delivering flutes of champagne and hors d'oeuvres no one could pronounce. Media cameras floated on silent dollies, their red lights blinking like unblinking eyes. Projected on a 40-foot LED screen was her name in soft cursive, "The Bridge Project, 10 Years of Light." Lana stood just off stage, surrounded by people in custom suits and expensive hair. Her posture was perfect, her skin luminous under stage lights. She wore white, always white, as if she were the savior of purity itself, and they adored her. Donors smiled wide and false. City officials leaned in, shaking her hand as if it were an endorsement they could put on a campaign banner. A local celebrity, some talk show host with teeth too white to be real, posed for photos beside her with a cocktail glass, and the caption, "Doing good, never looked so good." No one noticed the storm gathering in the background. Yet, Lana's voice rang out from the podium. 10 years ago, we set out with one mission to bring dignity and opportunity to the most vulnerable children on the planet. What started with 3 volunteers and a single truckload of rice has become a global network of compassion. Applause, flashes, nods. She paused just long enough to look humbled. And tonight she continued, "I'm honored to share our story. In these next few minutes, you'll see the faces of the children we serve, the places we reach, and the impact you, our partners, have made possible." She gestured gently as if releasing something delicate into the air. The room dimmed. The screen came to life. The opening image, a smiling child with a brightly colored backpack walking across a dirt road. Cue soft piano music. Then aerial footage of a refugee camp, dozens of white tents against a sun-drenched desert, edited in gentle sepia tone. Over the top, the words, "Every child deserves a bridge to hope." More applause, more flashes. Backstage, her assistant stood ready with the speech for the next segment. And in the back row of the ballroom, almost in shadow, stood Evelyn. I didn't need a spotlight. I was the storm. I watched the screen shift to the next scene, a familiar image. A little girl with her head tilted, eyes deep and knowing. Jamila. But this time there was no glow to the photo, no inspirational quote, no cropped edges. Instead, a caption appeared in stark white letters. This image was taken by Evelyn Monroe, 2006. Used without attribution or permission. A beat of confusion rippled through the room. The piano music cut abruptly. Another image, another caption, then another. Then came the voice. My voice. "The woman you're applauding tonight took my photographs. Photos of children who had already lost everything, and used them to build herself a fortune. Not a foundation, not a movement, a brand, a lie." Gasps. People looked up from their drinks, turned to each other. On-screen photos began to cycle children with missing limbs, sunken eyes holding signs of help. The original photos, raw, painful, undistorted, faded into Lana's edited versions, saturated, smoothed, rewritten. Then came the spreadsheets. Line items with red flags, dollar amounts, wire transfers, Crenshaw's name, fictitious programs, 2 offshore accounts. And over it all, the audio clip. No one needs to know the originals. It's all about impact perception. We're not lying. We're curating empathy. Lana's voice, unmistakable, cool as glass. Silence spread across the room like ink on water. Phones lifted into the air. Journalists leaned forward. A single click of a camera. Then 5, then 50. A sudden storm of shudders. On stage, Lana froze. Her face cracked, not dramatically, not all at once, but piece by piece. A twitch in the corner of her mouth, a flick of her eyes, a breath too shallow. She turned to the AV technician, but he was already backing away, his headset pulled halfway off, looking at her like she'd coughed blood on the mic. The screen kept rolling. The truth unspooled, slide after damning slide. Back at the table of the regional press, Kendra sat with her laptop open, typing in real time. Her editor's tweet had already gone viral. Breaking bridge project under fire after whistleblower Evelyn Monroe exposes fraud, image theft, and donor deception at live Gala. Lana tried to speak. She stepped to the mic. Clearly there's been a misunderstanding, but no one listened. Because that's when I stepped forward. From the back of the room, slow and steady, my cane tapping on the marble floor like a gavel. A hush rippled outward as people noticed me. Some didn't know who I was. Some did. But all of them could feel it. This was the reckoning. Lana saw me. Her mouth opened, closed. She looked to Brian, who sat stiff at a front table, eyes wide, completely still. I didn't walk fast. I didn't need to. I made it halfway up the aisle and stopped beneath the edge of the stage. The giant screen glowing behind me, showing one last image. Me, in the field. Camera slung across my chest. Hair matted with desert dust. A child clinging to my side. Lana stared down at me. I looked up direct, unblinking. "I taught you better," I said, my voice clear across the mic. Not loud, but enough. The silence cracked. Someone clapped, a single sharp clap. Then another, then more. Soon a wave of applause rolled through the room, not the polite, restrained clapping from earlier, but the kind that breaks something open, raw, unapologetic. I stepped back. I didn't need the stage. I'd already taken it. Lana, pale and visibly shaking, turned away. Her assistant rushed to her side, whispering. Security appeared near the hallway, waiting for a cue that never came. No one arrested her. Not yet. But the air had shifted. Every person in that ballroom now held a story in their hands. And it wasn't hers anymore. It was mine, ours, the children's. The ones who never had microphones, whose faces had been repainted, rewritten, sanitized for profit. As I made my way back to the edge of the room, Kendra met me there. She didn't speak, just handed me her phone. On the screen was the live feed. Over 93,000 people watching. Comments pouring in shameful. This is what real journalism looks like. Justice for the kids. She's a thief in heels. Where can we donate to the real photographer? I handed the phone back. Ready to go? Kendra asked. I nodded. I turned once more to look at Lana. She had collapsed into her chair. Her white dress now seemed ghostly, too bright under the lights, like a spotlight exposing a lie. And I walked out with my head high. Because the truth doesn't whisper forever. It waits, and when it speaks, it shatters. It didn't take long. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the world had already begun to close in on Lana Whitmore. In the digital space, she was collapsing in real time. The video from the gala had gone viral overnight. Multiple angles, multiple accounts. A mashup of the voice recording the raw photos and the moment she froze under the spotlight. Millions of views, hundreds of thousands of comments. Hashtags bloomed like wildfire. The bridge. Collapse, #justice, for Evelyn, #stolen faces. But the real blow came with the knock. At precisely 9:42 a.m., 2 agents from the state fraud unit walked calmly into her high-rise condo. She was still in her gala dress, rumpled makeup, half-smudged wine stain on the hem. Her face was drained, jaw set tight, as if she'd prepared a dozen legal defenses in the mirror, but didn't expect the law to arrive so quickly. The charges were read out clearly. Fraud, unauthorized use of intellectual property, financial misrepresentation of donor funds, coercive psychological manipulation of an elder, unlawful confinement by proxy. The last one made her flinch. They placed her in cuffs. No drama, no press allowed inside, but someone snapped a photo through the glass. Her arms bound, head slightly bowed. The face of a woman who had built an empire on fabricated empathy. That image made the front page of 4 national papers by noon. Beneath the bridge, the humanitarian queen accused of exploiting her own mother-in-law. And in smaller font below, whistleblower Evelyn Monroe breaks silence in exclusive interview tonight at 7 p.m. Brian saw the news from a waiting room television. He was sitting outside the HR office of Hawthorne and Pierce, the private equity firm where he'd been a partner for 8 years. They had asked him to come in for an urgent compliance review. By the time he arrived, they already had a file printed, statements flagged, financial records requested, a formal suspension prepared. When they confronted him with the numbers, shared accounts that had been siphoned slowly over 18 months, falsified authorizations for charity-related deductions, and over $430,000 in consultant payments traced to unregistered entities, he froze. I didn't know, he said. That was true, but it wasn't enough. Due diligence is not optional at your level. Mr. Whitmore, the director said, her voice clipped. You're either complicit or incompetent. Which one do you prefer we write in the press statement? He didn't answer. They gave him the weekend to clean out his office. By the time he got home, the condo was empty. No Lana, no clothes, no wine bottles. Just a single yellow envelope on the counter with his name written in sharp, precise cursive. Inside, a note with 2 lines. I warned you not to doubt me. Now clean up your mess. And a bank receipt. His account balance, $14.72. Everything else gone. He sat on the cold marble kitchen floor and wept like a boy. Not because of the job, not because of the money, but because somewhere in the middle of choosing his marriage over his mother, he had lost both. The press ran the story hard. They didn't spin it. They didn't soften it. They didn't use careful words like miscommunication or alleged oversight. They called it what it was. A mother institutionalized by the very people she had once given everything to. The stolen lives behind a stolen legacy. From photojournalist to patient, how Evelyn Monroe exposed the industry of curated empathy. Interviews poured in. Kendra handled most of the requests. I agreed to 2, 1 live, 1 written. In the studio, I sat with the lights bright on my face. Kane beside me, the journalist across the table, stunned silent when I said, I didn't want revenge, I wanted my name back, and the children's and my grandson's. She asked if I blamed my son. I looked into the camera and said no. I blame silence. I blame the way we excuse betrayal as misunderstanding. I blame our failure to teach people that compassion without truth is just performance. Elliot moved in with me 2 days later. He arrived with one duffel bag, a half-finished sketchbook, and a notebook full of codes we'd used during our mission. He didn't ask where his dad was going. He didn't ask why Lana never came to say goodbye. He just asked where I kept the good cereal and if we could hang the map of Kandahar in the hallway. We did. He got the room facing the backyard, the one with the apple tree. I got him a desk, a lamp, and his own drawer for secrets. We didn't talk about the White Room. We didn't talk about the Gala. We didn't need to. We had survived it together, and that meant we could live anything else. Brian came to the door once. It was raining again, always rain now, like the world had to rinse itself. I saw him from the window before he knocked. His shoulders hunched, suit, wrinkled umbrella forgotten. When I opened the door, he just stood there not speaking. His eyes were red. He hadn't shaved. He looked like a man trying to step into a version of himself he had long buried. I didn't know, he said. I know. I should have. Yes, I thought I was protecting you. I didn't see what I was protecting her from. You were protecting yourself, I said. From guilt, from choice, from the mirror. He looked down. I lost everything. No, I said softer now. You just found out what you never really had. He looked past me into the house. Elliot appeared at the hallway entrance, silent. They locked eyes. Brian looked back at me. Can I see him? I stepped aside. Not because he deserved it, but because Elliot had the right to choose. The boy walked slowly to his father. They stood just feet apart. Brian reached into his coat and pulled out a photo. A copy of one of my old war shots. Elliot had framed it. The two of us side by side, camera in hand. I keep this in my wallet now, Brian said, because I forgot who raised me. Elliot didn't reply, but he took the photo. That was enough for now. Brian left without asking for anything else, and I was glad. Because healing doesn't begin with someone begging for forgiveness. It begins when they stop asking you to forget. That week I got a letter from a woman in Ethiopia. She was in one of the camps I'd photographed. Somehow she'd seen the video. Somehow she remembered me. Her note read, You told my story once when no one would listen, and now you told yours. I pray the world is watching now. I am. I pinned it above my desk. Next to it, I hung a photo of Elliot on the bike, rain pouring down discs strapped to his chest like a soldier carrying ammunition. He didn't save me. We saved each other, and that I realized was the legacy worth leaving. Not the bridge Lana tried to build on false empathy, but the one I rebuilt plank by plank, word by word, choice by hard-earned choice. The bridge that led back to truth. And this time, no one was getting across unless they earned it. It didn't happen all at once. Healing, I've learned, is more like light creeping through tree branches than a door flung open. It arrives slow, in silence, in the things you almost miss. After everything, the cameras, the depositions, the night staring at the ceiling, I left. I didn't say goodbye to the city. I didn't hold a press conference. I didn't even pack much. Just a camera, a raincoat, and a shoebox full of undeveloped rolls. The house sat at the edge of a pine forest, its roof rusted slightly from storms past the front porch, still smelling faintly of cedar and old tobacco. It had belonged to a friend of mine, a war correspondent who never made it home. I inherited it, never expecting to use it. Funny how the places we run from become the places we run toward. The air was sharper here, clearer. You could hear yourself think. I filled the front yard with cactus, hundreds of them, all rescued from roadside vendors and forgotten gardens. People thought it was strange, but I liked their honesty. They didn't need to be soft to survive. They kept their water close, bloomed in silence, and only opened up when the light was just right. Kind of like me. I opened a small studio near the edge of the village. Nothing fancy. One wooden bench, 2 battered tripods, and a white sheet thumbtacked to the back wall. The first kids who came were shy, their parents even more so. But word spread the old woman with the storm-colored hair was giving out cameras and sandwiches. Most of them were refugee children, Boys with too short pants, girls with eyes too old for their age. They didn't speak much English, but I didn't need them to. I handed them a camera, showed them how to focus, told them, you don't have to smile, you just have to look. That's all some kids need, permission to be seen without having to perform. Elliot helped translate. He learned fast, picking up Spanish, Arabic, Twi. He organized the film rolls, built frames out of leftover wood, made signs for our Saturday exhibits. We called it The View from Small Eyes. It wasn't charity. It was dignity. One afternoon, while I was repotting a particularly prickly aloe, I noticed the blue truck. It didn't pull into the driveway, just idled by the gate. I knew it was Brian before he stepped out. He looked older, a little thinner, but calmer. He didn't bring flowers or explanations. He just walked around to the backyard where I sat with my gloves and dirt-streaked apron and took a seat on the low stone wall. He didn't say a word. Neither did I. We just sat for 28 minutes, give or take. The wind moved the branches above us like an orchestra tuning up. Somewhere a squirrel complained about something small. Elliot's laugh echoed faintly from the studio out back. Brian exhaled, and I let him. That was all that needed to happen that day. Later that week, Elliot found me in the kitchen scrubbing jars for pickling. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, something on his mind. He was tall now, 12, going on 17. Can I ask something, he said. You always can. He hesitated. Do you forgive him? I looked at him, at the boy who'd once carried proof of truth through a rainstorm like a soldier of memory. I don't think it's about forgiveness, I said. That word gets tossed around too easily. People use it like a sponge, something to clean up what they don't want to face. He frowned. So, you don't? I wiped my hands and sat across from him. Forgiveness means I owe him peace. I don't. What I offer him is a door, not wide open, but unlocked. If he wants to come through it, he has to do the walking. Elliot nodded, slowly processing it. And if he never does, then I'm still free, I said. Forgiveness is not for forgetting. It's for letting yourself live unchained. He smiled. That's heavy. That's living, I said, and handed him a jar. In the fall, we held our first real gallery show. A local farmer lent us his barn. We strung up the prints between beams, taped bios under each frame. We lit it with a dozen paper lanterns and the soft hum of a generator. The kids wore their best shirts. Some even brought their parents. And when the crowd walked through, whispering in awe at the photos of dusty shoes, cracked walls, small hands holding wildflowers, the children stood taller than I'd ever seen. A man from the paper asked if I was the teacher. No, I said. I'm just someone who gave them space. He paused. What do you hope they become? I looked around. A girl was explaining her photo of two shadows on a dirt path. A boy was pointing out how he captured the moment a drop of rain hit a puddle. They already are, I said. They just don't need permission anymore. Brian came to that show. He didn't tell anyone. Just stood in the back next to the refreshments, hands folded. I saw him looking at Elliot, watching him lead people from frame to frame, watching his son become someone else entirely. At the end of the night, as the lanterns dimmed, he approached me. He held out a photo. It was one he took recent. Me and Elliot in the garden laughing over something neither of us remembered. The colors were soft. The light was perfect. You still frame better than me, he said. I smiled, but you never miss the truth. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I touched his hand, not a handshake, not a hug, just a touch. That's enough, I said, and he nodded. Sometimes healing is a word, sometimes it's a photo, sometimes it's silence. But it is never owed. It is chosen. Every day. It started with a letter. Folded twice, tucked inside a manila envelope addressed in block handwriting that looked more like an apology than an address. Dear Miss Monroe. It read, I was one of the donors. I believed in everything Lana said. I believed in the faces, the tears, the glossy pamphlets. I thought I was helping. Now I see I was helping her. Stay rich. I can't undo what I did, but I'm sending this to you because I think you'll know what to do with it. Inside was a check, $50,000. That was the first. Then came more. Not money always. Sometimes a poem from a child in Turkey. Sometimes a small photo album from a nurse who used Evelyn's photos to comfort war victims. Once a stone carved with the word truth mailed anonymously from Vermont. They didn't come because Evelyn asked for them. They came because someone saw what she had built and knew it was real. That's how the Resilience Project began. No marketing, no board of directors, just Evelyn Elliott and a growing circle of exiles, artists, seekers, and children who once had no voice and now used cameras instead of words. They started traveling back to cities Evelyn once swore she'd never return to. Beirut, Sarajevo, a remote village outside Aleppo. They didn't go to document suffering. They went to teach people how to capture their own truths and own them. At every stop, Evelyn opened a new lock. Not a literal one, but an invisible one buried in someone's chest, rusted over by years of silence. "I'm not here to save anyone," she told them. "I'm here to hand you the key you've always had in your hand." It had been almost 2 years since the gala. The press had moved on, though her name still appeared in editorials about elder abuse, nonprofit fraud, and media accountability. Lana was now serving a 7-year sentence, eligible for parole in 4. She had tried from inside to publish an op-ed claiming Evelyn had manipulated her own son into framing her. It was rejected by every outlet. No one was listening to Lana anymore, and that silence was justice. Brian had rebuilt part of himself. He took a job as a high school counselor in a small coastal town, nothing with a title or a corner office. Just a desk, a drawer full of student essays, and a chair beside the window. He called once a week, visited once a month, and when he did, he brought Elliot weird snacks and me new film roles I hadn't asked for. That was enough. Not redemption, but rhythm. A new one. One evening, just before winter, Elliot came into the cabin with frost on his sleeves and an idea in his eyes. "We should open the house," he said. "Open it?" I asked. "To other kids," he said. "Kids like me, like the ones we met. A place to stay, to learn, to just not feel invisible for a while." I stared at him. He was taller now, stronger, but still carried that fire, the kind that only people who've had to fight for truth ever really learn to carry without burning. "And what would we call it?" I asked. He grinned. "The Unlocked Door." I laughed, then nodded. That spring we did. We turned the old barn behind the house into a dorm with 6 beds and walls full of photos. We cleared out the back room of the studio and filled it with secondhand DSLRs, tape recorders, sketch pads, and one very old laptop with all of Evelyn Monroe's lessons typed up, file name for anyone brave enough to stay true. The first kids came from a shelter in Oregon, then a foster network in Louisiana, then from a burned-out suburb in Romania. Some stayed a week, some stayed 6 months. No one was turned away, because that's what a door is meant for, not to lock people out, but to invite them in when the world says they don't belong anywhere. One night I sat on the porch watching the stars turn like slow music overhead. Elliot sat beside me, a blanket over his knees, editing shots from the latest workshop. He looked up and said, "Do you think we ever really close the final door?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked out at the cactus garden, now wild and sprawling, blooming under the silver moonlight. "I think some doors never shut," I said. "They stay open even when we're gone, because someone might still need to walk through." He leaned back and smiled, and for a moment we sat in the kind of silence that doesn't come from absence, but from peace, real peace, the kind you earn through blood, truth, love, and the bravery to never close yourself off again. There are doors you open once and never return through, and then there are doors you don't realize you've walked through until you're already standing in the light on the other side. That morning, the old brass hinge on the front door squealed. Elliot crouched by the frame, a toolbox open beside him, brows furrowed in the kind of concentration only 12-year-olds can sustain without losing patience. A long screw hung from his lips like a cigar. His fingers were stained with rust and sawdust. "It's hanging loose again," he muttered. I looked up from the porch, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of tea, the steam curling like memory. "You going to lock it this time?" I asked, already knowing the answer. He didn't even look up. "Should I?" "No." He gave the smallest smile, the kind that flickers across the corner of the mouth like a skipped heartbeat. The sun spilled into the house gold and unfiltered, bouncing off the wood floors and climbing the hallway like a slow tide. Dust motes danced like they had something to say. I sat back and watched him tighten the last screw. It wasn't about the hinge or the door. It was about the fact that for the first time, someone in this house was fixing something without needing it to break first. Later, I grabbed my camera, not the digital one, the old Nikon. The one that had been with me in Kandahar in Haiti in the refugee camp outside Lesbos. The one with the cracked lens hood and the strap that always smelled like rain. I wound the film slowly, clicked the shutter once, then lifted it again. Elliot was in the garden chasing the wind with a kite that refused to rise. His laughter floated back to the porch like wind chimes. Behind him the cactus bloomed in rebellion, pink and red and strange yellow, a whole orchestra of survival refusing to be quiet. I framed the shot and took it. Click. He looked up. You always sneak up on me. Old habits, I said. He ran over, breathless, cheeks flushed. Let me see. It's film. Oh, a pause. Then good. That means it'll live longer. Smart kid. I left the door open that night. Just left it. Not by accident, not because I forgot, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to trust the air to carry peace instead of danger. The screen door swayed gently, catching the breeze. The hinges whispered. Somewhere a fox barked in the woods like a tiny god announcing its presence. Elliot slept with the windows open. I could hear his breath, even strong. I sat in the kitchen with a notebook writing a letter I never intended to send. To the woman I used to be, it began. You were not wrong. You were just early. The world catches up eventually. I wrote until the tea went cold and the night turned blue at the edges. Then I closed the book and walked to the front door. Didn't lock it. Didn't latch it. Just touched the frame with 2 fingers and walked back inside. The next afternoon a girl arrived. She had 1 suitcase and no shoes. Her mother had heard about the program through a social worker in Tucson. They had nothing but a bus ticket and a phone number scrawled on a napkin. We gave her the bed closest to the window. Elliot handed her a camera. I handed her silence. She filled it with the sound of healing. She took pictures of the cactus and the barn and the peeling paint on the mailbox. Then she took a photo of herself in the mirror, eyes raw, shoulders back. She printed it that night and pinned it to the wall beside the others. No caption. Didn't need one. Some truths speak loudest when left uncaptioned. A month later, Brian returned. He didn't say he was coming, just showed up with a bag of apples and 2 jars of honey. Said they were from the orchard down the road. He stood in the same place he always did on the edge of the porch, as though waiting to be invited. This time I didn't wait. I pushed the door wider. You're early, I said. For what? For being forgiven, I said. He laughed, but it cracked, and something in his shoulders dropped. Thanks for not locking it, he said. I said nothing, because that was enough. Sometimes the best conversations happen when you stop needing them to. We sat in the garden that night. Elliot joined us. No words passed for an hour. Just 3 people breathing in the same direction again. When he left the door as he found it. Open. The photo I took of Elliot that morning, the one where the sun poured down and the garden looked like it was being born again, was the last photo I ever took with that camera. I printed it large, framed it in driftwood, and hung it in the entryway right above the unlocked door. There's a warmth to it you can't fake, a kind of defiance that comes not from rage, but from having survived rage and choosing not to let it live in you. People often ask who the boy in the photo is. Some say he looks like a child from a dream. Others say he looks like someone they used to know. But the truth is, it's not about who he is. It's about what's behind him. A door half open. Not locked, not guarded, just waiting. Waiting for someone else to believe they too can walk through. The screen fades to black, and on it the words appear quiet and sharp. The truth is always behind the doors no one thinks to open. Then, what would you do if you were Evelyn Monroe?